Chapter 3. Eddie Brown. Hubei and Auer, Technique, Hints to the Student. Notwithstanding the fact that Eddie Brown was born in Chicago, Ill, and that he is so great a favorite with concert audiences in the land of his birth, the gifted violinist hesitates to qualify himself as a strictly American violinist. As he expresses it, musically I was altogether educated in Europe, I never studied here, because I left this country at the age of 7, and only returned a few years ago. So I would not like to be placed in the position of claiming anything under false pretenses. Hubei and Auer, some comparisons. With whom did I study? With two famous masters, by a strange coincidence both Hungarians. First with Jenő Hubei, at the National Academy of Music in Budapest, later with Leopold Auer in Petrograd. Hubei had been a pupil of Vieux Tom in Brussels, and is a justly celebrated teacher, very thorough and painstaking in explaining to his pupils how to do things, but the great difference between Hubei and Auer is that while Hubei tells a student how to do things, Auer, a temperamental teacher, literally drags out of him whatever there is in him, awakening latent powers he never knew he possessed. Hubei is a splendid builder of virtuosity, and has a fine sense for phrasing. For a year and a half I worked at nothing but studies with him, giving special attention to technique. He did not believe in giving too much time to left-hand development, when without adequate bow-technique finger facility is useless. Here he was in accord with Auer, in fact with every teacher seriously deserving of the name. Hubei was a first-class pedagogue, and under his instruction one could not help becoming a well-balanced and musicianly player. But there is a higher ideal in violin playing than mere correctness, and Auer is an inspiring teacher. Hubei has written some admirable studies, notably 12 studies for the right hand, though he never stressed technique too greatly. On the other hand, Auer's most notable contributions to violin literature are his revisions of such works as the Bach sonatas, the Tchaikovsky concerto, etc. In a way it points the difference in their mental attitude, Hubei more concerned with the technical educational means, one which cannot be overlooked, Auer more interested in the interpretative, artistic educational end, which has always claimed his attention. Hubei personally was a grand seigneur, a multi-millionaire, and married to an Hungarian countess. He had a fine ear for phrasing, could improvise most interesting violin accompaniments to whatever his pupils played, and beside Rode, Kreutzer and Fiorillo I studied the concertos and other repertory works with him. Then there were the conservatory lessons. Attendance at a European conservatory is very broadening musically. Not only does the individual violin pupil, for example, profit by listening to his colleagues play in class, he also studies theory, musical history, the piano, ensemble playing, chamber music and orchestra. I was concertmaster of the conservatory orchestra while studying with Hubei. There should be a national conservatory of music in this country, music in general would advance more rapidly. And it would help teach American students to approach the art of violin playing from the right point of view. As it is, too many want to study abroad under some renowned teacher not, primarily, with the idea of becoming great artists, but in the hope of drawing great future commercial dividends from an initial financial investment. In art the financial should always be a secondary consideration. It stands to reason that no matter how great a student's gifts may be, he can profit by study with a great teacher. This, I think, applies to all. After I had already appeared in concert at Albert Hall, London, in 1909, where I played the Beethoven Concerto with orchestra, I decided to study with Auer. When I first came to him he wanted to know why I did so, and after hearing me play, told me that I did not need any lessons from him. But I knew that there was a certain something which I wished to add to my violinistic makeup, and instinctively felt that he alone could give me what I wanted. I soon found that in many essentials his ideas coincided with those of Hubei. But I also discovered that Auer made me develop my individuality unconsciously, placing no undue restrictions whatsoever upon my manner of expression, barring, of course, unmusicianly tendencies. When he has a really talented pupil, the professor gives him of his best. I never gave a thought to technique while I studied with him. The great things were a singing tone, bowing, interpretation. I studied Brahms and Beethoven, and though Hubei always finished with the Bach sonatas, I studied them again carefully with our technique. Some hints to the student. At the bottom of all technique lies the scale. And scale practice is the ladder by means of which all must climb to higher proficiency. Scales, in single tones and intervals, thirds, sixths, octaves, tenths, with the incidental changes of position, are the foundation of technique. They should be practiced slowly, always with the development of tone in mind, and not too long a time at any one session. No one can lay claim to a perfected technique who has not mastered the scale. Better a good tone, even though 100 mistakes be made in producing it, than a tone that is poor, thin and without quality. I find the singer finger bungen are excellent for muscular development in scale work, for imparting the great strength which is necessary for the fingers to have, and the kreutzer etudes are indispensable. To secure an absolute legato tone, a true singing tone on the violin, one should play scales with a perfectly well sustained and steady bow, in whole notes, slowly and mezzo forte, taking care that each note is clear and pure, and that its volume does not vary during the stroke. The quality of tone must be equalized, and each whole note should be sung with a single bowing. The change from up bow to down bow and vice versa should be made without a break, exclusively through skillful manipulation of the wrist. To accomplish this unbroken change of bow one should cultivate a loose wrist, and do special work at the extreme ends, nut and tip. The vibrato is a great tone beautifier. Too rapid or too slow a vibrato defeats the object desired. There is a happy medium of tempo, rather faster than slower, which gives the best results. Carl Flesch has some interesting theories about vibration which are worth investigating. A slow and a moderately rapid vibrato, from the wrist, is best for practice, and the underlying idea while working must be tone, and not fingerwork. Staccato is one of the less important branches of bow technique. There is a knack in doing it, and it is purely pyrotechnical. Staccato passages in quantity are only to be found in solos of the virtuoso type. One never meets with extended staccato passages in Beethoven, Brahms, Bruch or Lalo. And the Saint-Saëns's violin concerto, if I remember rightly, contains but a single staccato passage. Spiccato is a very different matter from staccato. Violinists as a rule use the middle of the bow for spiccato. I use the upper third of the bow, and thus get most satisfactory results, in no matter what tempo. This question as to what portion of the bow to use for spiccato each violinist must decide for himself, however, through experiment. I have tried both ways and find that by the last mentioned use of the bow I secure quicker, cleaner results. Students while practicing this bowing should take care that the wrist, and never the arm, be used. Hubei has written some very excellent studies for this form of springing bow. The trill, when it rolls quickly and evenly, is a trill indeed. I never had any difficulty in acquiring it, and can keep on trilling indefinitely without the slightest unevenness or slackening of speed. Auer himself has assured me that I have a trill that runs on and on without a sign of fatigue or uncertainty. The trill has to be practiced very slowly at first, later with increasing rapidity, and always with a firm pressure of the fingers. It is a very beautiful embellishment, and one much used. One finds it in Beethoven, Mendelssohn, Brahms, etc. Double notes never seemed hard to me, but harmonics are not as easily acquired as some of the other violin effects. I advise pressing down the first finger on the strings inordinately, especially in the higher positions, when playing artificial harmonics. The higher the fingers ascend on the strings, the more firmly they should press them, otherwise the harmonics are apt to grow shrill and lose in clearness. The majority of students have trouble with their harmonics, because they do not practice them in this way. Of course, the quality of the harmonics produced varies with the quality of the strings that produce them. First-class strings are an absolute necessity for the production of pure harmonics. Yet in the case of the artist, he himself is held responsible, and not his strings. Octaves. Occasionally, as in Auer's transcript of Beethoven's Dance of the Dervishes, or in the closing section of the Ernst Concerto, when they are used to obtain a certain weird effect, they sound well. But ordinarily, if cleanly played, they sound like one-note successions. In the examples mentioned, the so-called fingered octaves, which are very difficult, are employed. Ordinary octaves are not so troublesome. After all, in octave playing we simply double the notes for the purpose of making them more powerful. As regards the playing of tenths, it seems to me that the interval always sounds constrained, and hardly ever euphonious enough to justify its difficulty, especially in rapid passages. Yet Paganini used this awkward interval very freely in his compositions, and one of his caprices is a variation in tenths, which should be played more often than it is, as it is very effective. In this connection, change of position, which I have already touched on with regard to scale playing, should be so smooth that it escapes notice. Among special effects, the glissando is really beautiful when properly done. And this calls for judgment. It might be added, though, that the glissando is an effect which should not be overdone. The portamento, gliding from one note to another, is also a lovely effect. Its proper and timely application calls for good judgment and sound musical taste. A Spanish violin. I usually play a Strad, but very often turn to my beautiful Guillaume, said Mr. Brown when asked about his violins. It is an old Spanish violin, made in Barcelona, in 1728, with a tone that has a distinct Stradivarius character. In appearance it closely resembles a Guadagnini, and has often been taken for one. When the dealer of whom I bought it first showed it to me, it was complete, but in 4 distinct pieces. Kubalik, who was in Budapest at the time, heard of it and wanted to buy it, but the dealer, as was only right, did not forget that my offer represented a prior claim, and so I secured it. The Guadagnini, which I have played in all my concerts here, I am very fond of. It has a Stradivarius tone rather than the one we usually associate with the make. Mr. Brown showed the writer his Grancino, a beautiful little instrument about to be sent to the repair shop, since exposure to the damp atmosphere of the seashore had opened its seams, and the rare and valuable Simon bow, now his, which had once been the property of Sivori. Mr. Brown has used a wire E ever since he broke 6 gut strings in 1 hour while at Seal Harbor, Maine. A wire string, I find, is not only easier to play, but it has a more brilliant quality of tone than a gut string, and I am now so accustomed to using a wire E, that I would feel ill at ease if I did not have one on my instrument. Contrary to general belief, it does not sound metallic, unless the string itself is of very poor quality. Programs. In making up a recital program, I try to arrange it so that the first half, approximately, may appeal to the more specifically musical part of my audience, and to the critics. In the second half I endeavor to remember the general public, at the same time being careful to include nothing which is not really musical. This, Mr. Brown found one of his recent programs on his desk and handed it to me, represents a logical compromise between the strictly artistic and the more general taste. Example program. I, Beethoven. Sonata Opus 47, dedicated to Kreutzer II. Bruch. Concerto, G minor 3. A, Beethoven. Romance, in G major B, Beethoven Hour. Chorus of the Dervishes. C, Brown. Rondino, on a Kramer theme D, Arbos. Tango. 4. A, Chrysler. Dot. La Gitana. Arabo-Spanish gypsy dance of the 18th century B, Qui. Oriental? C, Boccini. La Ronde des Lutins. As you see, there are 2 extended serious works, followed by two smaller groups of pieces. And these have also been chosen with a view to contrast. The finale of the Bruch Concerto is an Allegro Energico. I follow it with a Beethoven Romance, a slow movement. The second group begins with a taking Chrysler Novelty, which is succeeded by another slow number, but one very effective in its working up, and I end my program with a brilliant virtuoso number. My own personal conception of violin mastery, concluded Mr. Brown, might be defined as follows: an individual tone production, or rather tone quality, consummate musicianship in phrasing and interpretation, ability to rise above all mechanical and intellectual effort, and finally the power to express that which is dictated by one's imagination and emotion, with the same natural simplicity and spontaneity with which the thought of a really great orator is expressed in the easy, unconstrained flow of his language.